Edinburgh has many old buildings, so here are some of the oldest. Crofton-Ree, roughly translating as Kingsfield, is a small mansion that sits just outside the gardens of Holyrood House. It dates from the 16th century, but was remodelled in the 17th century. It's believed it once belonged to Alexander Elphinston, Lord Elphinston, with William Graham, the Earl of Airth, who died in 1694, purchasing it from George Livingston, the 3rd Earl of Linlithgow. Around 1680, less than 2 years after the sale, the house was burned to the ground and remodelled in an L-plan form. In the 1870s, the turrets were extended. St Margaret's Chapel at Edinburgh Castle is believed to have been completed in 1130 by David I to honour his late mother, Queen Margaret, wife of Malcolm III. It's the oldest building in the city and the oldest Catholic chapel in the country. Its roof was raised after 1573. After the Cromwellian siege of Edinburgh Castle in 1650, the chapel became secular and at one stage housed a magazine. In 1845, Sir Daniel Wilson rediscovered it, and it was restored in 1853, including the installation of its 5 glass windows. It underwent further work in 1922, and today can be used for weddings and baptisms. St Giles, named after the saint who died in 721, was founded in the 12th century. Originally it was a small stone church and stood approximately where the nave of St Giles is today. It was burned down in 1385 by the English army of Richard II, but much of it survived. In 1571, William Kirkcaldy of Grange stationed troops in the steeple for 5 months. Restoration took place in 1829, and by 1883, the church, which had been made up of 3 separate church sections, was opened up by Lord Provost Dr. William Chalmers and made into a single church. In 1910, the Thistle Chapel opened, with funds having been left for it by Ronald Leslie Melville, Earl of Leven and Melville. Although only given the title of cathedral for a short time in its history, with it not having a bishop since 1638, it has retained it. It's also known as the High Kirk. Huntley House in the Canongate originally belonged to a family called Aitchison in 1517, but it got its name from the time of Catherine Gordon, Dowager Duchess of Gordon, who rented part of the property in 1753 from the incorporation of Hammermen of the Canongate, who'd owned it since 1647. Her son, Lord Alexander Gordon, known as Adam, succeeded to the tenancy following her death in December 1779, and it was through this connection it got its name, Huntley House. During the later part of the 18th century, the incorporation of bakers took on the tenancy of the southern part of it and built a bakehouse and the close named Bakehouse Close. In 1762, the Hammermen sold the property when there were 17 tenants living there, from craftsmen, a merchant, and Lord Gordon. In 1924, it was threatened with demolition, but the house was saved by the local authorities and used as a city museum. It has been extensively altered over the years since it was built, around 1570. It's sometimes referred to as the Speaking House, due to the Latin inscriptions on its facade. It's now home to the Museum of Edinburgh. Mry House sits at 53 High Street, next door to what is known as John Knox's house. Although there was a house on the site built by Robert Mowbray as early as 1477, the house we see today substantially dates from the 16th century. It survived the burning of Edinburgh in 1544. In 1910, it was threatened with demolition, but the Coburn Association launched a public appeal and raised enough money to purchase it. As it was in a poor state, it was repaired, but restricted to the first 3 floors at the time, retaining its 17th century interior. It has housed a tavern and a bookshop, and has been home to George Jameson, the Scottish portrait painter, and for a short time, writer Daniel Defoe lived there, while he was editor of the Edinburgh Courant newspaper. Archibald Constable, 1774 to 1827, also lived there. He produced the Edinburgh Review, the Scots Magazine, the Encyclopaedia Britannica, and published best-selling works of the day. The Canongate toll booth was built in 1591, during the time when the Canongate was a separate borough from Edinburgh. It served as a district toll booth, comprising a courthouse, jail, and public meeting place. Over the years it has been remodelled, but most significantly in 1875 by architect Robert Moram, when the clock was also added. Following the construction of Calton Jail in 1817, the Canongate toll booth was solely used as a debtors' prison, having housed Covenanters in the 17th century. In October 1834, just 17 people were held there. It now houses the People's Story Museum. The construction of the Magdalene Chapel at 39 Cowgate took place in the mid-16th century at the bequest of Michael McQueen, a burgess of Edinburgh, and his wife, Janet or Jonet Rind. He died in or around 1537 and bequeathed £700 to complete the provision of a chapel, a chaplain's house, and a hospital or almshouse, to house 7 poor men who were to devote their lives to God. Around 1547, work got underway, with Janet Rind overseeing it, and adding £2,000 to her husband's bequest. Among the conditions attached to the 7 men was that they were to pray for the soul of Queen Mary and their 2 founders. It was dedicated to Mary Magdalene. The hospital stood at the corner of the Cowgate and Candlemaker Row. It included the chapel, a tower and 2 adjoining buildings, with the chapel being considerably altered in 1614 to 1615 by the Hammermen to serve as a convening hall, and the tower was added by them in 1622 to replace a steeple on the cross house, which was then removed. It was the last Roman Catholic church built in Edinburgh before the Reformation, and has the only surviving pre-Reformation stained glass in Scotland. It went on to hold the first Protestant assembly of the new church in 1560. It's now the headquarters of the Scottish Reformation Society. Riddles Court dates back to the 1590s. It was a merchant's tenement just off the High Street. Inside, there is a painted ceiling which was installed for a royal banquet for James VI in 1598, and in 1751 philosopher David Hume lived there for a time. Its history began with John McMorran, who built the house we see today. It wasn't until 1726 that it became known as Riddles Court, due to George Riddle, a wealthy tradesman who carried out some reconstruction work on the old house. It was taken into the care of Edinburgh City Council in 1947. The Trinity apse is the only surviving part of the former Trinity College kirk. It was built on the eastern banks of the Nor Loch in 1462. The church and the nearby hospital were founded by Mary of Gelders, the then widow of James II, and occupied the site of the former St Ninian's Chapel. Its work was overseen by Sir Edward Bonkill, the first provost, and John Halkerston, Master of Works. Construction ceased in 1531, with only the choir and transepts being finished. Mary, who died in 1463, was buried within the chapel. By 1576, the hospital was already in desperate need of repair, and in 1585 was moved. After the Reformation, it was handed over to the Crown, and in turn to the Provost and Magistrates of Edinburgh by Royal Charter on 12 November 1567. In 1585, Robert Pont, the last Provost of Trinity, sold all the remaining rights. 300 years later, it was acquired by the North British Railway, and in the 1840s, the church was demolished to make way for the expansion of Waverley train station. The tomb of Mary of Gelders lay in the centre of the Ladies' Chapel and was discovered during the demolition works. She was reinterred at Holyrood. However, it was supposed to be saved by replacing it stone by stone to a new site, with each stone being numbered and deposited on Calton Hill. They lay on the hill for 30 years, and by the time thoughts were turning to rebuild it, much of its stone had disappeared. A small section survives at Chalmers Close, between the High Street and Geoffrey Street. The last in this list of some of the oldest buildings in the capital is the 5-storey Merchiston Tower. The 15th century Tower House was built around 1454 by Alexander Napier, the second Laird of Merchiston and Provost of Edinburgh, who had purchased the lands in 1438. It was included in Assassin of 1494 to 1495. Remodelling work took place in the 17th century and probably in the 18th century, but to a lesser extent, with the coat of arms of Francis Scott, 6th Laird of Napier, who succeeded his mother on her death in 1706, painted in various parts of the building. In May 1572, it was occupied as blockhouses by James VI forces to prevent supplies reaching Edinburgh Castle, then holding out for Mary Queen of Scots, and was attacked several times in its history. It was the birthplace of John Napier in 1550, the inventor of logarithms, and the place where he died on 3rd April 1617. It now sits within the grounds of Napier University. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.